Hey, welcome to channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about what if Naruto has dust release? And please make sure to check out author of this fanfic named Prince of War by Suave Sky. Let's get started. An annoyed sigh slid past his lips. The old man's eyes glanced around the small clearing, focusing his attention finally on one of the only people for the next 5 miles. Or at least he really hoped that to be the case. But knowing his luck, it was most likely not to be. Someone else would know, or at the very least would find out soon. We can't have this. Not now. Not with everything going around. He couldn't in all honesty blame anyone other than himself, though. He knew this day would come, and what would come of it could only be called his own fault. If he had said something beforehand to the boy, at least things would not be so hard. But now as it was, he would have to do a lot of explaining. So, what do we do? The old village leader didn't answer verbally. Instead, he began to move towards the blond boy, sidestepping the glittering spires with ease. It was really a remarkable sight. Towering spears the colors of the rainbow had tore through the ground, the failing sunlight dancing in their reflection. It was a moment that Sarutobi would always remember. But he couldn't stop to stare now. Too much work to do in too little time. This won't turn out good, sensei. No matter how much we try to hide it. Sarutobi snorted as he approached the downed Genin. Don't you think I know that? But it can't be helped at this point. Jiraiya of the Sannin shifted uncomfortably. I don't think anyone else was around when it happened. But we have to assume that others know. A pause as something occurred to him. Does anyone else know? My former teammates. Sarutobi answered as he bent down and moved his hand to check the boy's pulse. And a few more trustworthy ANBU who reported it originally. I can trust them well enough to keep it a secret considering they've done it up to this point. He smiled wryly. Why do you think those two put up with Naruto's foolishness for so long? The Sannin frowned. I would have thought those two the worst to know. How did you keep them under control? The old Hokage turned his head and shot his old pupil a frown. Contrary to your belief, Jiraiya, my teammates are not heartless monsters. They only do what they think is best for the village. The same can be said for Danzu. They understand that the burden Naruto bears is large enough as it is. Putting him in the spotlight or breeding programs would have caused unwanted questions. And it wouldn't be long before that information spreads out to other villages. What do you think would have happened then? The Sannin's frown deepened. He didn't have to think hard. Obviously, they would begin to pry, which would lead them to the facts that Konoha wanted to keep the most quiet. Eventually, they would all be unraveled. Naruto would be ousted easy enough as the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Then they would inquire as to his ancestry, which would get him in deep shit with earth and lightning. Everyone would want him. The only choices, though, would be kidnapping and assassination. He would be too loyal to even consider betraying Konoha. All in all, it would not be pretty. What are we going to do? The Sannin inquired, obviously at a loss. A seal? No. Sarutobi responded quickly as he rose. I've already sealed him once. This ability surfaced earlier in his life, when he was emotionally distressed. He doesn't remember, far too young, but I don't want to even begin to think of doing it to him again. Besides, we can if he was supposedly screaming bloody murder. Why didn't you say something to me before? Jiraiya began to argue. Why would you keep something like that under wraps for so long? For the same reason I keep the Kyuubi a secret. Puffing on his newly lighted pipe with his back still turned. To keep him safe, the Sannin opened his mouth to say something but quickly closed it. He could find no fault with that. Naruto needed all the protection he could get. Well, there are some positives. When he first showed this talent, it had been more than surprising to say the least. The last I believed to have it was Kushina's grandfather. He was ancient when I saw him, but I do have a good idea of some of the techniques he used. Saw a few of them. It is really useful. It would most certainly be one of the more powerful ones had it been more constant. Sarutobi nodded absent-mindedly. If anything, this will help him greatly if he can keep it under wraps enough. But this is Naruto we're talking about. Jiraiya started with a frown. In the meantime, it changes things quite a bit. His chakra's violent reaction has opened up a new can of worms, to say the least. And it completely changes the way I had planned to do things. I'll train him. Jiraiya blinked. Surprised. The words had been said so quickly and at the same time so resolutely. I'm sorry? Come again, sensei? He had to make sure he heard that correctly. Sarutobi finally turned to his former student, eyes full of conviction. For too long, I've held Naruto back from his potential. Held him from the truth. Not anymore. I am getting old, Jiraiya. I am no longer a Kage in terms of strength. But I am a teacher. You a primary example. He pulled his pipe from his mouth. So here's what we'll do. I'll take over his training for the exam. There's still a month and a half left to teach him from here on out. You and my teammates will help. He will be the future protector of Konoha, just as he always wanted. Just like his father wanted. Jiraiya's face became grave. What are you talking about, sensei? You have a village to run. The old Hokage shook his head again. Not anymore. My time is almost done. I have only a few years left. If worse comes to worse, Kakashi can take over for me. But for right now, while I have the chance and the ability to still move, I want to begin to train my successor. Just like my sensei did for me. Your successor? Jiraiya asked, incredulous. Do you really believe he can do it? The Hokage snorted. You've known him for 2 weeks now. Do you doubt? To this, the Sannin could say nothing. The boy was more than a little rough around the edges, but the talent was there in spades. He was a mess in terms of the fundamentals, but made up for it with his unpredictable nature and sheer determination. The boy had the natural talent, to be sure. It was the skill and expertise he needed. It will take time, maybe more than I have left, but I will at least see him on his way. You have seen the amount of potential he has. He needs no Kekkei Genkai or Bijou. His determination and drive alone can push him to the top. Jiraiya smiled. He's a lot like her in that way. Another pause. Does he know of her? Sarutobi immediately shook his head. No, too young to remember her. Another grave mistake of mine. But again, for his protection. Just think of the fallout around the village if they found out he was related to the killer of our last daimyo. Again, no thinking necessary. They would have skinned him alive. Another knock. Kid is going to flip. Correct. Which is why you have to place an overlapping seal in place. It's actually already done. I wanted him to grow first on his own power. This came about because the seal I placed limited the Kyuubi's chakra and forced his out more. Then I taught him water walking. He got it? His chakra control when the seal is released will be great improved. From there I moved to work on his natures. That's when it happened. The Hokage replaced his pipe. I suppose that's when things went south per se. Of course. Wind, earth, and water. 3? The Hokage asked with genuine surprise as his eyebrow rose up. 3? He had 3, but he considered himself the only one. Every other shinobi he had met only had 2 at the most. But then again, it did make sense. Then again, if Naruto had the talent he expected, then there would be no reason to think he would stop now. And you're worried if he has the potential. Didn't say that. Jiraiya protested. I question his maturity, which will come in time. I will make sure of it. After all, you were a handful as well. The Hokage began to weave around the crystals again as he stepped back to the Sannin. His chakra is spent, which means he'd be out until tomorrow at least. We have to move quickly to turn this in our favor. I'm going to take Naruto with me and find my teammates. You get rid of the evidence. If you know how. Yes, I saw it. Lighting, wind, and fire nature chakra can tear them down if I hit them hard enough. Or I can just use the pure chakra nature of the Rasengan to break them apart. Good. I'll inform them of the plan, and then I'll tell him. From there, it's up to me to work at him. I'll start with working on jutsu, befitting his nature. You'll work on what techniques you do know regarding this release. They will be impersonating me to keep everything as quiet as it can be. All right then, this is going to be tricky to pull off. Yes, but not impossible. Hurry now. Yes, sensei. Shit. A grin accompanied the hiss of words. His left hand reaching out and firmly grasping his right wrist in an attempt to apply pressure and stem the flow of blood. His middle finger had been broken in 2 places, his ringer finger tilted sideways, and he was missing his thumb, hand now in ruins. It would have been a grave and serious injury, career-ending in fact, for anyone. That is, anyone except for him. It was one of the few positives his unique situation brought him. His teeth snapped together as he fell back onto his behind and leaned his back against a free tree, closing his eyes and forcing himself to think of something other than the pain ripping through his arm right now. It was his own fault, really. What reason did he have to really push this hard? After all, he really had no real intention of continuing on his path of a shinobi. For what reason did he have to push himself to such harsh extremes? especially when he knew it would only lead him to more failure. Because it's the only way you'll ever get any answers, Naruto. The grin faltered for half a second before it completely fell apart. A pain-filled sigh racked his body. It wasn't physical, though. It was mental, emotional. Naruto, age 12, was so tired of living, of life in general. He had liked to think of himself as a good person with good morals. He didn't like causing people harm, and he didn't think his dreams and aspirations were anything to laugh at. Or at least he didn't used to. But now, was Cammy laughing at him right now? Was his life just one big joke? Just a big fucking sitcom? It had to be. It was the only explanation that he could think of. No use in feeling sorry for yourself, though. He had learned a long time ago that crying would not fix your problems for you. Or at least not for him. There were no fixing his problems, only adding to them. You really are a pathetic sort, aren't you? A bitter smile broke out over the thought. The pain in his hand now a dull ache. It would be completely healed by tomorrow. That had been assured by the fox demon the moment the injury had occurred, if the sudden twinge in his stomach was anything to go by. An increase in the amount of chakra that the seal let through had been an unwanted side effect of the seal work done by the toad Sannin. He couldn't blame the man, though. He was trying to help prevent something awful from occurring thanks to his old traitor teammate. Still, would it have been so bad? He found himself questioning as he leaned his head back against the tree bark and closed his eyes. Letting it all end here? Fade away. Why do you do this to yourself? The training grounds in the village hidden within the leaves were unique in the way they were made. Terrains usually varied, but at the same time were suitable for all sources of training. With that in mind, people rarely ever ventured too far away from the center of the village when looking for somewhere to train. But unfortunately for Sarutobi Hiruzen, the boy he had tracked this far wasn't most people. And for that reason, he found himself far from his home on this chilly fall night. His old tired eyes looked on to the form of the small child sitting in front of him, chest heaving ever so slightly to show how the physical exercises had taken its toll on his usually god-like stamina reserves. One eye opened and regarded the short man with a pensive look before snapping back shut. Shooting the Hokage a devilish grin, the boy leaned backwards and flopped onto the ground. Why not push myself? Should I really be concerned? Sarutobi Hiruzen frowned, unable to fully impede the sudden flash of annoyance that rushed through his body at the casual response. But he could not deny that it was true. It was useless to do so anyway, and useless to get upset by it. Irrational even. He should have expected that exact response from the moment he opened his mouth to voice the question. Do you hate me, Naruto? I'm nearly overflowing with hatred. Sarutobi jumped in surprise despite how soft the words had been spoken, turning his eyes to the blonde laying before him. The emotion behind each letter flowed from the blonde and into him, deep within his pores and spreading through his entire being. He could almost feel that same emotion in his veins. Not with someone or something in particular, though. Naruto continued just as softly. And most certainly not at myself. Not anymore, at least. But rather with the whole of our existence. The Sandaime Hokage could not prevent himself from inhaling deeply from his pipe. A reaction that served as a sign to his comfort levels. A little tick that was bad for ninja to have. One that only seemed to surface around this particular boy. He unconsciously pulled his ceremonial robes even tighter to his body in an attempt to ward off the sudden chill. Despite there being no wind. I see, he muttered around his pipe. One blew. I snapped open again despite the fact that it could not see the old man standing near the base of the feet. The other joining it as the blonde gave a noise of disapproval. No, I don't think you do. In fact, I know you don't. The boy contradicted. This isn't just a great disgust or high dislike for life in general. No, this is full-blown hatred. I hate this existence, or rather the lack of my own, the way the world seems to disregard me entirely. This is a legitimate hatred. To this, Sarutobi could not respond, closing his tired and weary eyes in an attempt to shake of his budding headache. A tired and long sigh escaped him, one of pity for the boy who laid before him. No one, especially not this child, deserved to be so worn down, to be so old and feel so tired despite the fact that he was so young. And yet he would never let it show for the fear that the boy would take it wrong. Naruto was far too strong for pity. Far stronger than he could ever be. Let me ask you something, Naruto. Pulling his pipe free from his lips. He paused until he was sure he had the boy's attention. Do you hate some more than others? The in question snorted. Of course I do. Or I'd be nothing more than a damn monster like they always said I was. Unable to determine what exactly started this cycle. What a sad thing that would be. A brittle smile. At that point I'd just be giving in to them, huh? A monster. A product of my environment. I never want that damn thing to happen. Sarutobi nodded. And who in particular do you hate more? Do you honestly need me to answer that question? No. Of course not. Because I already know. I'm sure you never wished you were just an orphan. Naruto began. But then again, I don't know your situation growing up. Nothing like yours, I assure you. But I do. I wish it all the time now. I would rather have all my family dead, or have all my family be ignorant of my life. Hell, I think I'd be better off just wondering. But to have family, and for them to not even look at you. For them to treat you like these other ignorant people. Sarutobi resisted the urge to protest that, to say he believed in him, because he could not in all honesty say that he never entertained the idea that Naruto would be something other than what the Yondaime Hokage had said. Not without disrespecting both of them. And he had come to respect both of them far too much for that. An echo of words spoken what seemed so long ago by this very boy rang out in his head, bringing new light to how wise the boy had always been. There's no worse pain in the world than to have something for the first time in your life, only for it to be let go, and then finding out that you have family out there, just as you always wanted, but for them to not even acknowledge your existence. It was the only time Sarutobi had ever even considered Naruto broken. But to his credit, the boy had just managed to keep going. He would have surely faltered long ago. The boy was in sudden movement, pulling his legs up until his knees met his chest before sliding his hands back behind his head and pushing himself into a half flip, catching himself onto his feet and turning his back to the old Hokage. Sarutobi looked away to the sky as the blonde dusted off his orange jumpsuit. A mockery. Good ninja didn't wear bright colors. Only legends did. If you're good enough to kill me, then so be it. He knew this symbol would be universal someday. See you around, old man. Got a lot to do tomorrow. Sarutobi gave him a nod of agreement as he looked off into the night sky. For some reason, the moon always shined brighter on this particular training ground, looking like a big diamond in the sky. And in his mind's eye, he could remember as it reflected off her eyes. Hey, old man. He turned his head to the blonde. Naruto had stopped walking but had not turned his head to meet his gaze. Do you think it's okay to want to die? If he was disturbed or surprised by the question, he did not show it. Instead, taking another puff of his pipe. Yes. No one should ever wish for death. And for doing so, they are a coward. No one ever has an excuse for it. A weak grin. Except you, Naruto. He could tell that was exactly what the boy wanted to hear. You really are a dumbass, huh? The blonde boy cracked open one eye and raised it up the tree. Speak of the devil. The toad Sannin, self-proclaimed super pervert, was staring down at him, looking none too happy. Whatever it was, Naruto didn't seem to think he could bring himself to care anymore. You're better than this kid. He couldn't stop the snort that escaped him. How would you know? We've only just met, right? I've seen enough in these 2 weeks. I've seen what you've been like before, kid. And this isn't you. Or at least it didn't used to be. The boy could practically hear the disappointment in the man's voice. Not that he cared anyway. It didn't matter what the old ninja thought. He was done looking for the approval of others. Jiraiya took his silence with a frown and dropped down without a sound onto the ground in front of him. Naruto regarded him with a one-eyed look for a second before closing it again, relishing the brief moment of silence. Unfortunately for him, it didn't last long enough. Look, kid. I can understand where you're coming from. I'll never fully comprehend, but I can gain a good view. Naruto met his words with a disbelieving snort. But I'll be damned if I let you sit around and wallow in your sorrow. Your father wouldn't like for you to. I don't give a damn. The words had been a near shout and had been spoken with so much venom in them that he was surprised himself. Jiraiya physically stepped back and flinched at the sudden explosion, looking at him with a glare before finally sighing and closing his eyes. I don't give a damn about him, or what he wanted. I don't give a damn about anyone else, just like they don't about me. I'm tired of being the good guy. I'm tired of always being the cheerful idiot. I'm tired of being too obtuse to see past what's really happening. Tired of acting like I don't understand. I'm done with it. Don't speak to me about him, or his family, or the woman who gave birth to me. And most certainly don't speak to me, Abu. The words caught themselves in his throat, and he nearly chocked himself on the emotion, bowing his head to the ground and hiding his eyes from view behind his bangs. He would not cry. Not anymore. He was done. Done with being sad. Done with being happy. Done with being mad. But Jiraiya wasn't. Look, kid, I don't know what to say, but I know you shouldn't be mopping around like this. You haven't been to training in days. And I don't plan to go. Naruto muttered. I'm done with being a ninja. After all the talk about trying to be Hokage, Jiraiya snorted. That's crap, because you want to be out here training right now. You said you want to be a legend. What's changed now? That was before your old teammates showed me how useless it all was. No matter what I do, those people will never respect me. Not even my own blood does. A surge of anger ran through the old shinobi, and he could not help the snarl that ripped through his mouth. Then make them respect you. Make me respect you. Because I've lost it all. Show everyone you aren't one to be trifled with. His face falling, an expression growing pensive. Show them by proving them wrong. They deemed you as insignificant. A useless tool. People have used you up and thrown you away before. Now it's your turn for payback. Getting even. To this the blonde did look up, giving Jiraiya a skeptical look. Forgive me for finding it hard to figure out what you're talking about. Like you haven't thought about it. A deal then? You get off your ass. Train hard. Get strong like we both know you can. And not with the fox demon. I mean on your own strength. If you're strong enough, you can make it on your own. And in return, I'll put everything else into second place to concentrate on finding the answers you seek. I'll find everyone that made you feel this way. And then you can beat the answers out of them. It'll be my top priority, even over what the Hokage wants me to look for. The skeptical look had turned to one of pure disbelief now. It was too convenient. Too easy. And what do you want in return? I just get the satisfaction of seeing their faces when they realize how wrong they've been. Do you really think I can? Of course. The real question you need to ask is to yourself. Are you willing to put in the effort to have what you want the most? To reach your goals? His goals? Yeah, your goals. Your new goals. Do you really want it? He didn't need to answer. Get up. Those two words had been said with such command that the body could not help but follow. Or at the very least try. Unfortunately, Naruto's body had pretty much been spent now. Still, he managed, after an extra minute or so, to push himself to his feet, swaying for a second as he fought for balance. The old Hokage frowned at the display, but made no move to help the young boy. He had chosen to continue when he had been given the option to rest. It was the boy's own fault for trying to work himself into the ground. That was a pathetic attempt. He continued to comment. If anything, your technique regressed with that last one. Naruto grinned weakly and shrugged. Unacceptable. Try it again. 3 hand seals later, and the boy was trying to fill his lungs with as much air as he could, focusing his slowly dwindling chakra around the sacs of air before expelling it as quickly as he could. Futon. Rinkun. The Hokage watched him passively as the ball of condensed air exploded from the boy's mouth. It fired along the projected line towards one of the training posts and collided with the wood. A grim satisfaction feeling him as he watched the wooden post become half a cloud of sawdust under the force of the ninjutsu. Acceptable for now. That was the best one so far. The Hokage commented, dressed in his own battle uniform for this occasion. It didn't lose form until it reached the target and did a suitable amount of damage. The blonde didn't reply. Hands on his knees as he struggled to fill his lungs with needed air after forcefully expelling it. It will take time to manage the ninjutsu without adverse side effects like the one you're experiencing. But it also comes with extra benefits, such as expanded lungs. If anything, the human body underuses its potential. We don't use all our brain power and limit our physical abilities. Examples of this are seen under times of pressure. You do things that you were never before capable of because of the force of your will. You make your body step up to the challenge, and because of it, your abilities rise to the occasion. This is the idea behind the gates. Naruto again said nothing, simply nodding his head as he returned to upright position with his hands on his hips. To tell the truth, the Hokage was more than a little surprised by how attentive the boy was. He had expected one of two things. The first being the usual hyperactive and squirming young man people had come to know Naruto as unwilling to sit and listen for directions. The second, and thought to be more likely, was a scowling and moody boy who did only what was necessary with little to no real effort, angered by the betrayal that had been set upon him. To his pleasant surprise, he received neither. Instead, he was met with a boy who did everything to the fullest, who did intake everything he wanted to say and put it into practice on his next attempt. A boy who easily withheld the information and theory he was speaking of. It was a little frightening to be truthful. Had he always been capable of this? Had he, the person who claimed to only want the best for him, overlooked him like everyone else did? The answer was as painful as it was obvious. He had. He had also painted Naruto in the light that he would struggle as a ninja. Not because of the way the boy acted, but because he had just originally assumed the boy had only average potential. How stupid that had been in hindsight. This was the only child of the Yondaime Hokage. Greatness was in his blood. Power and potential were his birthright. How many times had someone just sat down and began to work with him? How many times had someone taken the time to put aside their misconceptions enough to offer him individual training like they no doubt did for everyone else? Had Kakashi even considered taking Naruto on for some one-on-one work like he had jumped to do with Sasuke? Of course not. And because of it, Naruto had been unable to grow. Mountains of wasted potential. No more. Can you go again? A nod and his hands clapped together to begin seals. Sarutobi could not stop the grin that slid into place even if he wanted to try. What I want you to do is actual very difficult. Naruto frowned as he listened, inhaling deeply as he struggled to catch his breath after another grueling training session. The old Hokage leaned casually against a nearby tree as he observed his newest pupil. It had been 2 weeks since they had began to train, and Sarutobi was more than a little impressed. The boy had always struggled through schoolwork and didn't take well to verbal instruction. But when you actually showed him with movement and examples, things seeped in at an alarming rate. Once Sarutobi had learned that the boy was more a kinesthetic learner, the way to his brain opened like the petals of a flower. The man had quickly learned that the best way to show the boy how to do something was to show him before beating it into him. It was working perfectly. As Jiraiya no doubt told you, jutsu can usually be broken down into 2 different types of techniques: nature manipulation and shape manipulation. One uses pure chakra, and the other changes chakra to match a certain element type, like fire and water ninjutsu. The blonde commented as he followed along with the old shinobi. And things like Kawamari fall under the manipulation category. Sarutobi nodded. Correct. It showed that he had indeed been listening. His biggest problem: in order to make or truly master a ninjutsu, you need to have at least a deep understanding in one of the 2 categories, if not both. Jutsu that use them together are usually the most powerful types that fall under at least the B rank category. A strong example of this is the Water Dragon Jutsu, which uses nature manipulation to mass together a great deal of water, and then shape manipulation to form the dragon it is named for. The genin nodded as he followed along in what he had been saying. It made sense now that he had began to rationalize it in the terms the Hokage had used instead of the in-depth concepts that Yumino Irika preferred. With that being said, I'll take the idea of nature manipulation a bit deeper, Sarutobi said as he reached into his white robes and removed his customary pipe from wherever he hid it. I want to explain the idea behind elemental techniques, of which most are blood inheritance. The blonde sat up a little straighter as his train of thought merged onto the path the Sandaime Hokage must have been going towards. He formed a fist with his right hands as excitement started to run through him. He was finally going to begin what had always been denied to him. If Sarutobi noticed his sudden change in body language, he said nothing as he calmly lit his pipe with a fine manipulation of fire chakra. He took a deep breath and savored the sweet and smoky flavor of his tobacco before he removed his pipe and exhaled slowly. Some bloodline limits, he began slowly as the smoke dissipated, are actually not restricted to blood lineage. In reality, they simply need the right combination of chakra elements and the skill needed to combine them equal in order to produce the needed results. With that being said, they are usually restricted to families due to the chakra combinations being similar. From there, it takes simply the proper training from older and more experienced members, who of course would not share the secrets with those who aren't of the blood. The young shinobi remained silent as he listened intently to his teacher. Those techniques are usually called Kekkei Genkai, the same as actual physical abelites such as the Hyugas by Yukigen or the Uchiha Sharingan. However, there is something even more rare and in most cases more devastating. He paused here and stood from his position leaning against the tree to take a few steps to the genin. He placed his pipe back into his mouth and took another deep breath as he stopped just before the blonde. As I just said, an elemental Kekkei Genkai, or bloodline limit, uses two elements that are combined equally to create a completely new element. What many don't know is that there are an even more powerful combination of elemental chakra that requires at least 3 different elements. He paused to let that sink in. This sort of combination is known as a Kekkei Toda, or bloodline selection. The genin blinked in surprise as he took in what the man had been saying. His mind briefly went back to the battle in Wave Country and the techniques the young boy who had taught him so much. It matched exactly what his opponent had told him before his final moments. By now you're no doubt thinking about your mission to Wave Country. The Hokage correctly guessed, and if not, that is the example I will use. According to the report, you became friends with a young boy who turned out to be one of your enemies. Now, apart from the fact that you should be more careful about who you speak to, I want to talk about his unique ninjutsu, the ice techniques. Naruto said, "He mentioned everything you're saying. I just didn't understand it like now." Sarutobi nodded as he took another puff of his pipe. The Yuki clan used to indeed reside in water country. He continued, they specialized in water and, as you've guessed, ice ninjutsu. During the time before the great shinobi villages, when the clans did nothing but engage in constant battle with others, the Yuki clan once held an entire region near swamp country where they used the natural moisture to their advantage, and as such had decades to perfect their techniques. That is an example of an elemental Kekkei Genkai. As you can say from experience, it is extremely powerful and versatile, and as such the secrets are guarded jealously. It's what made the report about the boy you encountered so surprising. I had little personal contact with members of the Yuki clan, but I've never heard in all of my years as the Hokage of an ice-based technique that created mirrors. I'd wager that he personally created that technique under Momochi Zabuza's guidance. For someone his age to have used it with such a devastating effect meant that he had to have practiced extensively with it. With that line of thought, I can come to the conclusion that the boy created the ninjutsu quite a while before you ever encountered him. Years perhaps. For him to only have been a year or so older than you speaks volumes about his natural talent. Naruto nodded slowly as he listened. Indeed, it did say a lot about the kind of shinobi Haku must have been. The boy would have been hailed here in the village as another clan genius, without a doubt. Maybe even more so than Sasuke or the Hyuga boy. And yet for all that talent, he had died so easily when it all came down to it. It was a somber line of thinking. He had nowhere near as much talent. Now, with that being said, I want for you to understand the difference in ability between an elemental Kekkei Genkai and an elemental Kekkei Toda. The Hokage continued. First and foremost are the rarity. As I said before, Kekkei Toda are mostly unknown. The largest reason for that are the lack of them in our world. Apart from the ice ability you came across, I can tell you off the top of my head around 5 other elemental Kekkei Genkai, with the first 2 coming to mind being the scorch element made famous in Suna, and the wood manipulation that my sensei became renowned for before he took on the mantle of the first Hokage. The Hokage removed his pipe and fixed a strong look on to the boy, which froze him in place. I can, in all my years as a shinobi, only tell you of one ability that officially counts as a Kekkei Toda. And the only 2 people who have ever shown the ability both became Tsuchikage. The blonde blinked as he took in the words and processed them. The idea that the abilities that Haku had shown were still another level under what they could have been was mind-blowing, to say the least. The boy had been so powerful, easily high Chunin level. The only real weakness he had shown was his own kindness. And despite the fact that he was the personal student of a well-known A-rank jounin who specialized in stealth and assassinations, it still said volumes about the strength of his blood ability. But here the Hokage was telling him that in his 70 years as a shinobi, he had come across a technique that was not only rarer, but far more powerful. So much so that the only two people who could use it were S-class in terms of strength. Naruto was many things and far from bright, but he wasn't a complete fool. The fight between Kakashi and Zabuza would never truly be forgotten, and it helped show just how far he had to go. But even so, he knew just from his less than 5-minute bout in the second portion of the exams that the gap between Kakashi and the man known as Orochimaru was beyond large. The idea that one extra element meant the difference between Hai Chunin to Kage was astounding. The Jintan, or dust release, was first used by the Nidaime Tsuchikage. Mu had been known as the Null Man for his stealth capabilities. But even more devastating were his ninjutsu techniques based around the Jintan element. With this power, he could destroy entire armies and crush his enemies at their most basic levels. In addition, his mastery over his ability even allowed him to fly for a period of time and lift objects well over 100 times his own weight. Naruto swallowed as he listened attentively. The techniques that the Sandaime Hokage were describing seemed beyond imagination. For as amazing as ninjutsu and the ninja arts in general were, Naruto never thought anything of this sort were remotely possible. That man passed the techniques on to his prized pupil, a distant nephew, who also shared the same 3 chakra natures he did. The Hokage smirked as something passed in his eyes. The battles I waged against the man who became Sandaime Tsuchikage were ground-shaking. And the more I think about it, the more sure I am that we, along with Aime's leader in Hanzo, have to be of a dying breed. From a time where the world around us was much more wild. The old shinobi shook his head to clear his mind. It would do him no good to start drifting down memory lane right now. As I said, the dust release is the only official example I have of a Kekkei Toda. But for quite some time I have come to the conclusion that 2 other special elementals combinations could also require 3 natures. One is the magnet release of the now-dead Sandaime Kazekage, who used his special chakra nature to combine shreds of iron powder used for smithing into something monstrous. He paused again and looked the boy in the eye. The second is the crystal release. Naruto froze still as he realized what the old man had been leading up to. The special ability that he had apparently only been able to use accidentally to this point. The chakra-based ninjutsu that caused all of this and made him feel as if he were being ripped apart from the inside. The memory of the pain was terrifying, but the idea that he had his own special ability was beyond exhilarating. The ability you've shown twice now, the Hokage said, was only seen by one other person in my time, a man known as Shinto, Uzamaki Shinto. He paused for a second before he dropped the bomb. The man who would have been your great-grandfather. The boy's heart nearly stopped as the words reached him. Another portion of his history revealed. More proof that despite what everyone had once told him about himself, the name Uzumaki actual did mean something. When I first meet that man, he was far along in his life. But like the Uzumaki clan had always been, he was full of vigor and healthy beyond what those his age should be. He sparred once with my sensei, the Shotomi Hokage, as an example to us of the younger generation about how far we had to go. He grinned here. Maybe if he had been 20 years younger, my supposedly unbeatable sensei would have lost. He turned his attention to look at the sky above them. The sunlight had begun to fail them, and the stars would soon begin to peek at them from the night sky. They had been training for such a long time, and even still it wasn't enough. This day would not be over any time soon. Your test with the chakra paper yesterday confirmed my long-held suspicion. He continued as he brought his attention back to the Genins seated on the ground before him. Your chakra is far more developed than anyone else your age. Perhaps this is an effect of the Kyuubi, or something to do with your status as a member of the Uzumaki. Or maybe you are just as special as you've always said you are. Any way you spin it, you have an advantage most people never have, let alone most ninja under Jounin. I intend for you to use that. Naruto simply nodded as he began to stand. His breathing had long since calmed down, and he had retained everything the man had told him. He had so many questions and things he wanted answered, but he had learned that there was a time and place for that. Now is not that time. We'll begin right away. Sarutobi said, we don't have the time needed to show you how to properly manipulate elemental nature. That's something that takes decades. However, the fact you've used this ability twice now, without any prior training, means the requirements for at least early usage is low, and your body has the chakra memory necessary to use it. Naruto nodded as he took another deep breath and rolled his shoulders. Good. Now to start, we have to first begin on the basic applications of each three natures. The Hokage began as he led his newest student onto the path to controlling his unique elemental chakra. The genin exhaled slowly as the chill reached his skin. Goosebumps rose up as his breath condensed the air in front of him. He stood shirtless as he marveled at the work of the Sandaime Hokage for what had to have been the 10th time that evening. The man was far more genius than he could have ever imagined. To have frozen an entire lake solid in mid-spring with simple manipulation of chakra spoke volumes about what the man could accomplish. And it showed him how far he would have to go. Focus. The blonde chided himself as his blue eyes glanced around his bare surroundings. Where is he? He currently stood atop the man-made ice ring without a shirt and in simple shorts. The rules to this particular exercise were simple. Keep from falling unconscious. The icy footing made it difficult to keep his balance and forced him to continuously regulate a flow of chakra to his feet to keep his footing reliable. At the same time, he was to keep a slow flow of chakra from the pores on his upper body in an attempt to keep himself from freezing. This was an advanced sort of chakra training the Sandaime had introduced the day before. After he had successfully learned the water walking exercise to the degree that he was capable of sustained combat while staying upright, the Hokage had immediately pulled him from the surface of the water before he used a single ninjutsu to freeze it to the core. As he watched in awe, the boy kept an ear open to the words the old man imparted onto him. You never know what kind of environment you'll be deployed into and what kind of challenges you would meet there. And so you should always try to prepare as best as possible for it all. The old shinobi went on to tell him of the different long-term assignments he had taken during his youth and the different environments he had been deployed into during the days of war. He went on to say how something as simple as letting the smell of a swamp distract you could mean the difference between life or death. Or worse, winning a war and losing it. You never know what to truly expect, Naruto. The man had said as he finished his ninjutsu. As you rise in rank and reputation, you'll be allotted missions that offer both a higher pay raise and a higher level of danger. From that point on, the intelligence we give you can only take you so far. A number of things can change or go overlooked. Or perhaps your client will even flat out lie to you. I think you know exactly what I mean. He did. He took note of those words as well, just as he did everything the old Hokage had thrown at him. In fact, the more time he spent with the old leader, the more he came to love the man's teaching style. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered before. It was a mixture of both sink and swim, with a hint of this is why this happens. Cause and effect with visual and physical examples. It worked for him, and it was showing. For the first time in a long time, Naruto enjoyed training. He enjoyed learning about the world of the ninja. Instead of going through the motions, he woke up every day with an eagerness to begin while going to bed at night, tired yet satisfied. He knew it couldn't last forever, so he took in everything he could as fast as he could. There were 2 weeks left before the exam. He was prepared to make them count. The slight shuffle on the wind reached his sensitive ears. The boy was moving a long time before the shuriken even reached his position. He moved across the ice in a controlled slide as he focused all his senses onto the world around him. The chakra on his skin tingled and rippled as it reached out to the world around him. They had learned a week prior that he had minor talent as a sensor. If it came from blood or from the 9 tails, they did not know, but it was useful nonetheless and added another thing for Naruto to focus his training on. Another avenue to increase his skill. For now, he had little to no skill with it, but he knew enough to help him find the direction of chakra that traveled towards him, like the flow underneath the ice below his feet. With an application of control he didn't have before, the blonde shifted his chakra through his soles and into the frigid ice below him. He stopped immediately before he hopped backwards. The timing was perfect as the meaty fist ripped from before him. He stopped and juked sideways as the summon fully freed himself from the water before rushing right at him. He had quickly come to respect the strength of the Sarutobi head's contract. They were physically imposing and agile in ways that a human could never be. Their tails acted as extra limbs, and with their tremendous strength, they made for excellent fighters in terms of taijutsu, something he had come to find out the hard way. The block came up in a near textbook example of what the Hokage had shown him. Rigid and firm, it served its purpose and stopped the haymaker inches before it met his face. He retreated quickly as the slightly taller animal began to press its attack. Fist flew, feet flailed, and the tail twirled as his opponent for the day sought to teach him taijutsu the hard way. And the boy was quick to show what he had learned in response. Block after block and strike after strike, the blonde struggled, but nevertheless kept up with his assailant. The two danced across the frozen surface of the lake with a flurry of motion that normal people could barely see, much less follow. Naruto ducked low under a hook before he lashed out a right sweeping punch of his own, aimed for the ribs. It was slapped aside, and the monkey to the chance to lean forward and fire off a quick knee towards the unprotected side the overextension created. The blonde was ready for that, and with a slight application of his chakra in a circular motion, he adjusted his footing and slid his body to the opposite side and brought the same arm in a returning back fist. The quick twitch fibers of the summon allowed it to avoid the strike by leaning its head back with its legs still extended. Falling backward, it caught itself with its right hand while its left leg switched the attempted knee into a front kick. The blow landed home, and the genin was uprooted from his feet, but still maintained enough control to avoid from falling backwards. Instinctively, his chakra reattached his footing, and he forced himself to breath as the assault continued. He raised his arms to defend each punch and shifted his base to avoid each kick. Taijutsu had never been one of his strong points, something that could now be contributed to his lack of proper education. But now he felt that he could at least take on most Chunin, and he would fight no one as strong or as fast as the Sandaime anytime soon. He may not be able to beat the Hyuga genius in a straight-up physical fight at this point, but at least he wouldn't go down on the first few blows. Enough! The two combatants instantly split apart at the command. The genin huffed and heaved as he took the time to catch his breath. The Hokage calmly stepped out onto the ice and walked towards them with his arms clasped behind his back. He looked over the two of them each before he nodded as he apparently found something he liked. "Very good. Both of you," he commented as he puffed merrily on his tobacco. "It seems as if you've actually got a workout from this Sanji." The monkey, Sanji, nodded in reply as he too took the time to catch his bearings. A stirring of pride began to rise from deep within the genin as he realized that he had caused that. The first time they had sparred the week prior, he had barely been able to manage a full minute before he had been knocked down. Now he had nearly fought to a standstill. "Thank you for your help, and please send Emma my thanks as well." The monkey nodded before it bowed to them both and dispelled. Sarutobi waited for the smoke to clear before he focused his attention solely on the blonde. "That was excellent work today. You've come a long way in your taijutsu in such a short time," he complimented. And it was true. More and more the genin impressed him with his capacity for learning. It is imperative that you keep your taijutsu training up. Many young shinobi overlook it for the flashy abilities of ninjutsu, when it can be the difference between life and death. Obviously, to be a Hokage, you have to have some proficiency in each of the three main phases, but the best thing to do is to become well-rounded enough. The genin frowned. I thought working on too many skill was a bad thing. It was one of the few things he remembered from the academy. The Hokage nodded slowly. Yes and no. Most shinobi have neither the talent or the patience needed to completely round themselves. And it can be a bad thing to be a jack of all trades. But at the same time, it can successfully cover weaknesses. You don't have that kind of excuse. You have the talent, Sarutobi argued. Naruto nodded as he rolled his shoulders. So what's next? Next we'll begin summoning. The Hokage replied, I have a surprise for you. For all your hard work. The blonde grinned slightly before he smothered it down. What I have in mind for you, he continued, is both beyond useful and beyond dangerous for you. Years ago in my occupation as a jounin, I came across a fierce competitor from the now destroyed Hot Springs village. This man used an unusual sort of summoning, and after his defeat, I came across his scroll. Strange? The blonde questioned. Strange in the abilities it showed. The Hokage smiled at the genin. Abilities you'll have to learn yourself. Summoning contracts are rare and valuable village resources. Konoha has the most at a total of 10 in mass circulation. In order to sign a contract, one must go through a long and extensive process that isn't even available until you reach special jounin levels. Of course, there are some special cases in which these things can be circumvented. This is one of those such cases. I can use this summon? The blonde asked hopefully. The Hokage nodded. Naruto, you can have the scroll if you can convince them to take you in. We got a problem. The Hokage stopped mid-step and turned in the hallway to face his old student. Jiraiya, you've returned already? The Sannin didn't say anything, his face full of the serious sort of conviction that he only showed during the most dire of circumstances. The village leader noted this and turned to continue his journey to the office he hadn't visited in over a month. If the Sannin was here now, this had to be important. He opened the door and stepped inside, a copy of him looking up in surprise. A nod, and the person was replaced with an older-looking woman who rose from the seat. The Sannin quickly stepped through the door and leaned against it. Are we clear? Yes. The elderly woman answered as she shot a look between them and stepped from behind the large desk. What's going on? We apparently have a problem of grave importance. Sarutobi answered. I'll leave it to you to relay it to Hamaru. Jiraiya? If you remember, I said something not too long ago about checking up on Uchiha Itachi. The two village elders shared a look before nodding. Then I sent a report noting a possible connection between him and Orochimaru. Yes? The old Fire Shadow's voice now stern, a nervous edge creeping up. What is it? I found that connection, and it's not good. The Sannin paused here and looked between the two. It appears that a few years back, before Orochimaru became leader of Sound, the two had been allies in an organization of some sort. A high-class organization. What sort of organization? The kind that spells bad news for not only Konoha, but the entire ninja world. Apparently, it was a group of 10 with a very specific membership requirement. You had to be a missing Nin, S-class, and wanted for some kind of heinous crime around the shinobi world. The words seeping into their head. Even the Sannin, who was reporting it, taking note of it again. The bad kind of fuckers that you didn't want to mess with unless you had no other choice. Koharu frowned, worry showing in her eyes. This does not bode well. Any idea as to what they were doing? Oh yes, I have an idea. Jiraiya responded before taking a deep breath. Apparently, they were focusing on kidnapping, or more specifically grabbing a certain group of people. His eyes quickly darting to the large bay window and the monument on the mountain. Keijin Churiki. They're hunting them. Sarutobi could not help but draw in a large gulp of air in surprise. Disbelief written across his face. A reaction that was matched by his old teammate. For what I don't know, Jiraiya continued, but it can be safe to say it's not good. And from what I gathered, Orochimaru rebelled and went into hiding from them after he attempted to harvest Itachi's eyes, to which he was promptly beaten and tossed aside by our young mass murderer. Do you have any idea who else is included in the group? No. The Akatsuki, their name, is very closely guarded, and I had to hide this informant for fear of his safety. But he did give me one piece of information, a measure of how dangerous they can be. What is it? Dropping down into his seat. You remember the Civil War in Kiri, correct? How can we not? Koharu replied as she chose one of the seats in front of the desk. The bloodline limit purges. Rather insane. The Hokage added, blaming all the bloodline clans for their problems and wars. I've got some really chilling info that the Akatsuki had something to do with it. Rumor was that the last Mizukage was the Sanbai Jinchuriki, and that after he was defeated, it was unmasked that someone wearing a black cloak with red clouds had been using a jutsu to influence him for years. The calling card of the Akatsuki. A tense silence descended on the room. The old Hokage sighed heavily as he dropped into his chair and clasped his hands under his chin, resting his head and weary eyes as he tried to maintain control of the wave of thoughts. He sat in the same chair that had been through so many of these situations before. Another crisis befalling his village. His home. We have to tell Naruto? Koharu frowned. What? We have to tell Naruto. He repeated as his eyes moved up to meet hers. Let him know of their presence and what they're after. Put him on alert for anything too suspicious. Is that wise? She protested. I just don't seem to believe Uzamaki can handle it. I agree with Sensei on this. Jiraiya stepped in. He'll find out sooner or later. But at least this way, he'll have time to prepare himself. It involves him directly and in turn affects the village as a whole. He at the very least deserves to know, if only to keep his faith in the village. I suppose so. It makes perfect sense. Hiruzen continued. I'll leave it to you to tell him, Jiraiya. Understood. I was planning on seeking him out after this. Only 2 days left. Meanwhile, we'll be working to make a contingency plan for defending the village. Koharu frowned even deeper. You expect them soon? No. Or at least I hope that isn't the case. Rather, this is a precaution for the finals. The finals? The Sannin asked as he finally stepped away from the door. Do you anticipate something happening? The Hokage gave him a dull look. Do you honestly not? You know Orochimaru as well as I do. He wouldn't have come out of hiding just to mark young Sasuke. He wants something more out of all this. The only question is what? Out of all the Uchiha left in the village, why do you think he'd choose Sasuke? Because of his potential? His connection to Itachi? No. I believe the answer is far too visible to look that deep. Koharu nodded her head. For the simple fact that he has chosen the path of revenge. A heavy sigh escaping her. It would be easiest to tempt him with the promise of power. What he can't obtain easily here in Konoha. Of all the Uchiha left, Sasuke is the most emotionally and mentally unstable. Others might have dreams of revenge, but only he actively lets it rule his life. For that, we have to keep a close eye on him, especially considering his disposition towards Naruto. Seeing someone he previously disregarded improve so drastically in such a small amount of time could invoke him into a fit of rage. And then I could easily see him falling into Orochimaru's trap, listening to the sweet whispers of power. It couldn't be something that we could put off, though. Naruto needed the training, and this new development only makes it a more pressing matter. Hiruzen, Koharu began as she shot her old teammate a curious glance. Do you honestly believe Uzamaki has improved that much in such a short time? To be stronger than Sasuke? That isn't something I can say at this point without having an idea about how well Kakashi has trained him. With the Sharingan, he has the potential for drastic improvement. But I do believe that Naruto has the ability to win this exam and show the skills necessary for Chunin promotion. To be honest, I was at a loss for how much potential Naruto showed himself. He shows a surprising grasp when words are put into the right terms. And his physical abilities were quite impressive to start. And the Kyuubi? Not a problem, Jiraiya interjected. Before we even began, I put a seal on him to limit the Kyuubi's influence on him. I wanted to teach him how to manage his own power before delving into that of the fox demon. And at first it seemed like a good idea. We were working on nature manipulation when his Kekkei Genkai resurfaced. Nature manipulation? A genin? She asked skeptically. The Sannin shrugged. He was doing fairly well. Obviously, I hadn't expected for him to gain complete control. But I wanted enough for him to manage higher-level ninjutsu. I started with wind, being his primary nature, and figured with his massive chakra reserves he could use wind ninjutsu for mass area damage where he could not counter with inferior skill. Keep the Hyuga boy from using taijutsu. I continued on that base. Hiruzen added, realizing that they were now explaining Naruto's training. Earth and wind natures are around a good level. He still needs a lot of work if he ever wants to get to the elite level, but for now he's well beyond genin. It's more than a little unfair at how quickly he's progressed considering he's the only one capable of using the Kage Bushin technique to its full potential. Add to it his work with his Kekkei Toda, speed training, minor taijutsu adjustments, and summoning. He can summon? Jiraiya asked in real surprise, an expression that Koharu mirrored. What is it? I had hoped he would continue the tradition and summon toads. No. Sarutobi cut off as he shook his head. He would not accept that. For that I gave him another choice. Do you remember Koharu? The scroll we found as a young team? She frowned. Those strange violent beasts? They accepted him? The Hokage nodded. Indeed. I was reluctant at first and insisted on staying with him for safety reasons. But in the end he supposedly impressed them quite a bit. So it's safe to say he's more than ready for the exam? Indeed. Which means we have, for the moment at least, one less problem to deal with. And with that in mind, we have to make a move now. Jiraiya, I'll be counting on you to watch over Naruto from here on out. Make sure he's prepared for this Akatsuki. All right, Jiraiya nodded. And as for Orochimaru, don't worry about that. Hirushin Kutin, we'll be handling that. All I ask is that if something were to happen, you would protect the village and its occupants if I am predisposed with something else. Are you sure? I could. No, just what I've asked. Giving his old student a slight smile. I don't want to worry you any more than I have. The Sannin frowned but gave in and turned to open the door. All right, I'll be on my way then. Check on the kid before the exam. Very well. Goodbye, Jiraiya. See you, Sensei. The Hokage waited until he was sure his old student was gone before turning to the other occupant of the room. Now then, I'll need you and Hamaru. Stage 2. A shift in perception. The air was full of excitement, and the village was abuzz. Travelers from far and wide had marched upon the village hidden by the leaves in anticipation of this one day. The final round of the Chunin exams were set to start that afternoon, and everyone who was anyone were prepared to attend. Around the village, a festival had started, and the people congregated together in groups by the thousand. Various bets were made on the outcome of the exams, and nobles from various settlements came in droves to be wined and dined as they took the chance to check out the young future of the various shinobi villages. Away from this all, Naruto sat alone at his favorite ramen stand. His eyes traced the crowd of people before turned in his seat to face his ramen. This was the day he had been waiting for. The day he had busted his ass to get to. The day where he would really begin his journey. Today he would make sure the village knew his name, and then the whole world. His eyes glanced up to two of the few people in the entire village that had gained his respect. The sight of his favorite ramen spot, filled to the brim with customers, brought a now rare, genuine smile to his face. They had always shown him kindness despite the trouble it caused them. But that would all change now. No point hanging around here any longer, Naruto thought as he looked around the crowded area. These people have come for a show after all. With a wave of his hand, he signaled the ramen stand server. Thanks for the meal, I am. He called as he set down a stack of Rio that far exceeded the amount necessary before he slipped another piece of paper on top of that. 100-to-1 odds. He thought as he began to walk away from the stand. That'll put them in a great position. And with that done, the blonde made his way to the newly built Coliseum. The roaring crowd was more than he expected. Far more. Thousands upon thousands of civilians, shinobi, and prospective clients had already packed the stands in preparation for what was to come. It was a sea of people so great the blonde didn't even bother to make a guess as to how many of them there were. Over the break, the Hokage had chosen to delve deeper into the meaning of the Chunin exam. He expanded on how its purpose of promoting unity was important, but overall, simply a front. Clients used their battles to measure the worth of the next generation and to decide where to put their stock for the future. Poor showings could mean the difference between a boom or a bust for each ninja's respective villages, something that apparently Suna had already been feeling. It was because of this the children of the Kazekage were even allowed to compete in the first place. As the first family of the village hidden in the sand, they were to represent that despite falling on hard times, the village still had more than enough talent at its highest levels. Or at least that had been the idea. The fact that the only 3 sand ninja who attended the exam had all made it to the final round would help to validate that claim. At least until they were knocked out by the home crowd, that was. Hey Naruto, what's with the new get-up? Naruto glanced down the line to his right, where the young heir of the Nara clan looked over him. The blonde frowned, but didn't give anything else in return. He was unsure of how he felt concerning his fellow Leaf Genin. Unlike most, they had known him from the time spent in the academy together, and did nothing more but antagonize him. The more he thought on the subject, the more upset it made him. He had always been subjected to unfair treatment by those around him, and had largely gotten used to it. But still it annoyed him to have all of his attempts at friendship rebuffed or mocked. And now the other Leaf Genin wanted to act like they were great friends? Naruto gave no verbal reply and instead faced the crowd ahead of them once again with full intent to ignore the question. His Genin teammate was missing, and the young ninja briefly wondered if it was the work of his former Jounin sensei. Not that it would surprise him any. Kakashi and Sasuke were made for one another. The Nara clan heir shook his head at the rude dismissal and gave the blonde Genin another look over. He now wore a pair of loose-fitting black pants with two small orange stripes running down the side, while using his hiatate as a belt with its black cloth. Strapped to both legs, the blonde wore the usual shinobi pouch with a stock of kunai for the left and shuriken for the right. A black vest zipped up to the middle of his chest covered a short-sleeve orange shirt that just managed to reach down to his biceps. Bandages had been wrapped from just below the elbow up to the tips of his digits and fingerless gloves covering each hand, while the meta plating below the knuckles protected the back. His hair had grown somewhat, and now the bangs fell into his eyes and obscured them just enough. And to top that all off, for some reason the blonde had taken to wearing a bright and obnoxious colored orange cloak to cover it all. That aside, he looked like an actual shinobi now. Or at least as much as one who was obsessed with the color orange could be. Still, if the blonde Janine thought the change in uniform would help him in his fight against the Hyuga prodigy, he would be in for a rude awakening. Maybe getting his face punched in again will finally teach him some respect. The Nara heir thought briefly before he snorted. Unlikely. All except for Uzamaki Naruto and Hyuga need to leave the staging ground. The examiner proclaimed. Naruto briefly noticed it was a completely different man than it had originally been, but didn't think anything of it as the genin around him walked away. Follow me, Uzumaki. The genin followed the proctor as he led him a considerable distance away from his still opponent before he allowed him to turn back around. The two genin faced each other as the examiner addressed the crowd around them, who roared in anticipation. Everyone liked a good fight, especially ninja fights. The Hyuga prodigy faced his younger opponent with the superior smirk he always sported. He looked over the smaller genin before he snorted. You can forget now and save yourself some humiliation. The blonde genin frowned and made to open his mouth to reply before he stopped himself. He was letting his opponent get under his skin already. The Hokage had warned him of that, and if he let himself fall victim to his enemy's taunts, he had already lost the battle between the minds. His lack of response did not seem to bother the young Hyuga though, and if possible the smirk seemed to grow brooder. Good. He spoke again. You have complete confidence in your skills. It'll make crushing you all the more sweeter. Again he only received silence. The silence that spanned the distance between the two could be cut with a knife. The exam proctor, chewing on this senbon, looked between the two young shinobi, eyes glancing from the favored to the underdog. Despite everything he had been told about the two competitors up to this point, he could not shake the feeling that this was going to be a battle that would be talked about for a long time in the village. Around them the crowd roared, anxious for the first fight. He raised a single hand high into the air and held it with palm open. Are both of you ready? The Hyuga nodded. The rookie genin nodded. He swiped his right hand through the air. Hajime! The first improvement the Hyuga prodigy noted was the increase in overall speed. By the time the proctor had finished moving his arm, the blonde was in motion. One quick hop back to increase the distance was followed by the right hand reaching down and flicking free 5 shuriken. Then half a second later the two hands had together and the 5 metal stars had become 50. The Hyuga stiffened as the customary veins around the side of his face bulged open. He bit his lower lip as his Byakugan enhanced sight caught the glints of fire attached to the end of each metal star. Exploding tox. Shit. With his hand forced, the young shinobi evaded the incoming death, trapped the only surefire way he knew how. By spinning in a complete circle. Kaiten. Heavenly spin. The blonde narrowed his eyes in surprise as the dome of solid chakra took shape around his adversary. The shuriken exploded on contact, and a great wave of fire, so intense he could feel the flames prickling his skin, blossomed open. The genin didn't waste any time in preparing his next move. A cross-shaped seal later, and 2 shadow clones popped into existence around him before they darted off towards the dwindling cloud of smoke. A pair of shuriken cut them both down midway as the Hyuga genin ripped free of the devastation. He charged across the ground hard and fast as he sought to close the gap in order to attack the blonde in close quarters. His feet slid to a halt and kicked up dirt and gravel as the other leaf shinobi began to make a row of seals even faster than he had before. Suedon Mizurappa, water release, water trumpet. The Hyuga prodigy pulled his body into a tight spin to the right to avoid the violent burst of water that ripped across the distance between them. He focused on his footwork and came to a stop facing his opponent again, only to jerk back as a wave of orange clouded his immediate vision. The older Jinnin lashed out with a chakra-coated palm strike and struck nothing but air as the younger Jinnin body flickered past his defense. The Hyuga prodigy gritted his teeth as he lashed his left foot out directly behind him and forced the blonde to evade by quickly turning his body to the side and slapping it away with a palm. Using the momentum, the Hyuga quickly turned to meet his younger adversary and lashed out a front kick that was blocked by a raised knee. Undeterred, two hands lashed forward towards the chest in what would be crushing blows, only for strong blocks to deflect them at the inner forearm. The blonde dropped his knee and leaned forward to reach past the Hyuga's guard. The action was met with the prodigy quickly taking a step back before he realized he had been handed and hopped over the leg sweep the younger Jinnin had set up. The blonde leaned forward onto his two hands before he lifted his lower body up and lashed out with a quick side kick that stopped the prodigy's drive short. Then he focused a burst of chakra down and out with enough force to launch him sideways into a roll. Standing quickly to face his opponent, he leaned and knocked away another chakra-infused blow with his right hand before he lashed out with a front kick from his right foot. The Hyuga prodigy evaded that with a nimble sidestep as he moved to the outside and jabbed at the limb with two fingers. The two Jinnin became a flurry of strikes and blocks as they tried to land a solid blow. The crowd's combined voices rose into a frenzy as the young Leaf Ninja went at each other with all the ferocity of bitter enemies. To the people, it was an unexpected strong fight from what was supposed to be a quick encounter. The shinobi, however, saw something completely different. To them, two young ninja flashed skill that boggled the mind when they factored their age and experience. The seasoned veterans saw two young ninja whose hand-to-hand combat skills far outstripped anything more than two-thirds could have pulled off at the same stage in their own personal developments. It was the future spread out before them. "That can't be Naruto," the Yamanaka clan heiress shouted as she looked down on the arena below them. "Tell me that's not Naruto." Haruno Sakura opened her mouth to reply before she snapped it shut. Her body had gone still, and her own eyes were open with shock as she stared down at the scene before her. She wanted to say something, anything really, but couldn't. Because despite the loyalty she wanted to show to her teammate, there was just no way that was Uzamaki Naruto. "Tell me it isn't him." The blonde Kunoichi had taken to gripping the metal railing in front of her to express her disbelief physically. "That isn't Naruto. It is." The male beside her cut in roughly. "That's him all right. Only he could stand to wear that much orange." Inazunka Kiba's voice was serious and out of character. In his lap, the small puppy that served as his partner curled up as it watched the match along with its master. "But how?" The girl stressed. "How the hell did Naruto, of all people, get so good?" "I don't know." The boy snarked sarcastically. "Maybe by training? I know if I were given 2 months to work with and heard everyone counting me out, you best better believe I would do everything I could to show them wrong." The words were rough but truthful all the same. But what kind of training could turn someone so helpless into something so fierce? Haruno Sakura rationalized as she watched her teammate twist and twirl with the older Jinnin. She could scarcely believe it herself, but here he was matching an older and more experienced opponent blow for blow. The short boy, who was more brawler than ninja, had managed to keep up with previous year's best rookie. A member of an honored clan who was known specifically for their skill in hand-to-hand combat. And this one was known as the most gifted they had. How in the hell was he doing this? The Hyuga prodigy felt the opening before it even came up. A feint with his right hand forced the blonde to guard. A mistake that the older Jinnin capitalized. With a simple shift of his footing, he reached out and further batted the arm apart. Inside his younger opponent's guard, Hyuga Niji snapped off 3 quick finger taps before he finally landed a fierce palm strike that sent the younger Jinnin stumbling back. Without missing a beat, the white-eyed prodigy flashed forward before he rose up and launched a side kick directly to his adversary's chest. The shorter Jinnin flew back with wide eyes as he hit the ground with a thud and rolled back feet overhead. With his smirk back in place, the Hyuga quickly rushed forward again and followed after with the intent on ending the match, only to stiffen in surprise as his combatant dispelled into a puff of smoke mid-roll. The blonde erupted from the ground with the force of a breaching whale. The long-haired Janine slid to a stop and leaned back just enough so that the uppercut only snapped his teeth shut by brushing the edge of his chin. But off balance, he was unable to stop the flowing kick that slammed into his stomach with far more force than anything that Blonde had shown up to that point. The older Leaf, Janine, felt the air force from his lungs as he was sent jolting backwards by the strike. He fell onto his back and slid for half a second before experience forced him to roll his body to the right in order to avoid the knee drop that landed where he had just been. Even with no air in his lungs, the Hyuga Janine lashed out, turning his body sideways and throwing a quick kick that caught the turning Blonde in his side. Naruto grunted as he hit the ground before he rolled with the momentum and forced his way onto his feet. Niji was on him the next second, and the Blonde retreated as he blocked the rough series of strikes the older Janine leveled at him. Seeing no other way to put distance between them, the Blonde took a gamble and turned his body to the right. He grunted as two strikes slammed into his shoulder as he skip-hopped to escape the onslaught. Though he could feel the area start to numb, immediately the maneuver paid off as it allowed him to pull free 3 shuriken to cover his tracks. The Hyuga prodigy juked to the side as the stars flashed toward him before he slammed to a stop as he looked up to see the younger Janine crouched down before him with one hand on the ground. The two went still for nearly 10 seconds before the younger Jinine's face grew grave. "Before we continue," he said, "I want to ask you, what the fuck is your deal?" The Branch family member blinked slightly in surprise before his brow furrowed. The veins surrounding his eyes pulsed with irritation as he processed the words. He grit his teeth, and his right hand twitched in frustration. "My deal?" The words were hollow and dead. "You want to know what my deal is?" The Blonde frowned. "Damn right I do. Why did you go off like that before? What has she ever done to you?" "Hyuga Hinata is a failure." The older Janine cut in. "Right now, in their graves, our ancestors laugh at the idea alone that someone like her would take on the title of clan head." His white eyes pinned the younger Janine to the spot. "A failure?" Naruto echoed in disbelief. Niji nodded as he calmly stood to full height and crossed his arms. "That is correct. She, who was born heiress to our clan, is routinely mocked. She is unsuitable for the life of a ninja and the horrors it can bring. She is shy to a fault and dislikes causing suffering of any kind. She doesn't have the will in her to strike down the clan's enemies." Naruto's mind flashed back to Wave Country and the kind young man who had spared Sasuke's life only to die himself. It was as the Hyuga prodigy said, some people weren't made for the horrible nature of the ninja life. But even still, who was he to tell someone what they could and couldn't do? This was the kind of person that made him the most angry. "The Hyuga clan is proud." The older Janine continued. "Our lineage goes back to the time even before the shinobi arts came about. We are warriors at our core and noble on our exterior. For generations, we have been serving the Leaf Village proudly as members of its shinobi corps. And yet the next head of our family cannot even defeat her younger sister, 4 years her junior? This is unacceptable in our eyes. And that gives you the right to belittle her?" Naruto challenged as the crowd above them began to get restless with the stop in the action. "That gives you the right to step on her dreams?" The older Janine scoffed. "Dreams? Hyuga Hinata's dreams are just that. They aren't things that can be accomplished. She's the kind of person who wants peace for everyone in every little thing. She doesn't like conflict of any nature. Her dreams consist of us holding hands from Kyumo to Kiri and singing about kindness and happiness." He chuckled darkly and gave a shake of his head. "Those aren't dreams. Those are delusions. There is too much hatred and animosity between the people for what she desires. Even in this village, there are grudges generations deep that can never be overcome. Something she can never understand. Something she refuses to even try and see." He took a deep breath and closed his eyes as he tried to rein in his temper. "As for my deal, I have a personal vendetta that extends not only to my younger cousin, but to all members of the main Branch family. My deal is that I don't even have a choice in my own life. My deal is that my fate has already been sealed." The Blonde narrowed his eyes in confusion. "Your faith has been chosen for you?" "Indeed," Niji replied as he opened his eyes. "And the fate of all other branch members. To live and die as slaves of the main branch due to the Juinjutsu placed upon our foreheads." His hands had began to rise up to his face. Naruto said nothing as the older genin reached back and untied his forehead protector. His eyes instantly zoned in on to the array displayed across his forehead. He had heard about this from the Hokage, about the horrible treatment of the Hyuga clan branch members and the origins of said seal. With this seal on my forehead, my fate is already written. I will die a slave to the main family as all branch members before me have. His face became twisted and his expression bitter. As my father did, Naruto raised an eyebrow as they came to the heart of the matter. Your father? Yes. My father who was killed for the sake of the main branch. Sacrificed for a mistake he did not make. He took another deep breath to calm himself before he continued. Years ago, when I was still young, the Leaf Village held a festival designed around peace. And the honored guest was a diplomat from Kumo, a Jounin. Naruto remembered that. He had been unable to go for fear of how the people would react. But he did remember that the Hokage had been too busy with the diplomat to see him. It was a farce, a lie so that Kumo could pull another underhanded tactic. Neji said, in truth, the man was here for one thing only, to steal the Byakugan of the Hyuga clan. And as such he chose his target, young Lady Hinata. As you can tell, the attempt fell. In his rush to escape, the kidnapper had been tracked down by our clan head, her father. But in his anger, instead of capturing the man, he killed him swiftly. A mistake that made for a political disaster. The blonde could already see where this was going and didn't like it. It was a deep-seated grudge that he admitted had some claim to it. Suddenly, the older boy didn't seem as much of an asshole as he originally thought. Kumo, of course, denied any involvement and instead threatened with war. The only way to appease them was to give them the life of the man who had killed their diplomat. But that wasn't possible. The main family head could not be expected to take responsibility for his mistake. And so instead, they sent a decoy in his place. His twin brother. My father. The words were said with a snarl that made it clear what he thought on the matter, and Naruto could not blame him. Because Hayashi-sama could not control his temper, my father had to die. I hate that, but I do understand it. The genin's hands had become fists at that point. But to see my younger cousin acting this way? Weak, helpless, useless. It makes you feel as if your father's sacrifice was in vain. Naruto cut in quietly. Even so, the Hyuga prodigy seemed to have heard him. He shook his head again and caused his long hair to sway with the action. More than that, I've trained every day to make myself the kind of shinobi my father would be proud of. I've learned, despite the intent of the main branch to hide the resources from us, maneuvers like the heavenly spin on my own. I've mastered every challenge sent my way. And yet, no matter how far I get, I'll never get the respect I deserve. He's beyond angry. Naruto thought as he eyed his opponent. He's pissed, and I can't say I blame him. Once upon a time, he would have stopped the older genin there and yelled things at him. Things like he was nothing more than a fool or selfish. He would have once declared something like he didn't believe in fate and would do everything in his power to change his perception as well. He would have made promises about the things he would have accomplished when he took on the mantle of Hokage, and that he would make sure that the branch Hyuga were free. Now, he just didn't care. I don't know. Neji continued as he reached up to his forehead protector back. If the clan head, my uncle, even cares that my father died. I used to imagine that he did and felt a great amount of guilt for it. But then again, we'll never probably know. And instead, every day, I have to watch the person my father was sacrificed for fail again and again. He pulled the clothing tight before he slipped back down into his stance. That's what my deal is. What's going on down there? Haruno Sakura thought as she shifted over to another seat on her right to make room for the newest addition to their viewing group. It was more than a little surprising when Rock Lee had descended from the stairs and had asked for a seat. The fact that the genin was moving at all was beyond remarkable. The willpower needed to force his body to be here had to be staggering. Not that Sakura couldn't understand why he would push himself. Even she knew how significant it was for him to be here. Excuse me. The brown-haired girl who had helped him down the stairs had began to speak. But could you tell us what's going on right now? Sakura couldn't remember her name, but knew her as the teammate of Lee and the Hyuga prodigy. Of course, any answer she would have had didn't even make it to her lips before the blonde next to her leaned forward and began to give an avid recap. Sakura frowned as he moved her head out of the way of flying limbs. It was strange to say the least. One minute they were tangled in a complex series of taijutsu moves, and the next they were calmly speaking to one another. She didn't know what to make of it. Naruto didn't usually do anything more but rush his opponent and try brute force. But then again, he was doing a lot he didn't normally do. And then they broke apart before. The Yamanaka clan heiress trailed off with a frown. Before they started talking, the disbelief on the brown-haired Kuniochi's face was amusing to say the least. I see, though she didn't believe it. Rock Lee, on the other hand, had a bright smile on his face as he looked down onto the arena below them. I knew Naruto-kun could do it. It felt a little wrong cheering against his teammate, but there was more than just squad pride on the line here. If anyone is a genius of hard work, it's him. His teammate frowned as she looked to him and started to say something before the boy at the far end from her spoke up. They're starting again. Naruto rolled his neck before he nodded his head. I can respect that, Dan. I was just a little curious. The older Genin said nothing and simply stared back at him with bulging eyes. The blonde didn't take offense to this and simply took a deep breath, knowing that the slight intermission was over. His curiosity had been indulged long enough. It was time to finish this. Here we go. Clapping his hands together, the blonde ran through a series of seals before he channeled chakra to the tips of his toes and pushed off. The Hyuga prodigy didn't even bother to match the charge. Instead, he chose to widen his base and flood his right arm with chakra as he prepared to reveal one of his new techniques. Taking a deep breath, Niji dipped his hips further before he took a hard step forward with his left foot and threw his right arm out towards the charging Naruto. Akakiso. 8 Divination Sign Air Palm. Naruto blanched as the wave of chakra rushed towards him across the expanse between them. Unable to dodge in time, inspiration struck him. A seal-less shadow clone popped into existence beside him as he slid to a stop. It reached out and grabbed him by the shoulders before heaving him aside with all its might. The wave of chakra decimated the clone, and Naruto winced mid-air as the memories rushed into his head. He righted himself and landed in a crouch, only to jerk back in surprise as the Hyuga prodigy entered his space via Shushin. The arrogant smirk was back as the Hyuga spread his arms wide and crouched down before him. You're in the range of my divination, he announced as his Byakugan took in the location of the blonde's Tenketsu, and 2 fingers extended from each fist. Shit! Hack Rokujinshu. 8 Divination Sign, 64 palms of the hand. 2. Niji shouted as 2 fingers slammed into the blonde. 4. Naruto snarled as the assault began in earnest. 8. 16. His hands only blurs. The Hyuga prodigy turned his body to assault a different section of the body. 32. It was now that something occurred to him, and the Hyuga prodigy realized that something was very wrong. 64. His furious attack continued as his arms became nothing more than blurs. He struck and pushed chakra at each of the points he saw before he realized that pain had begun to shoot back into his own arms. A startled gasp ripped free as his attack finished, and he realized with his Byakugan enhanced sight that none of the Tenketsu he had attacked had been closed. He finished by slamming a palm into the blonde's chest, intent on launching him away, only for him to realize that he had been hitting something solid the entire time. His gaze snapped up from the chest, the younger Genin's eyes. Now the blonde held the arrogant smirk. You're in the range of an ass-whopping. What had followed next was a completely different experience for the Hyuga prodigy. The blonde slapped his hands together in a ram's seal, and his smirk widened. Niji watched in surprise as black markings suddenly spread across his skin before completely fading from view. He took the time to hop a few steps back for distance as he tried to figure out what had happened. He didn't get far. One Shushin later, and the blonde was in his space before he delivered a right swing that was far faster and far stronger than anything he had delivered before. Niji deflected the blow away with a slap of the opposite hand, but was unable to react fast enough to avoid the follow-up knee to the side. He gasped as pain instantly began to spread from the point of origin before the right fist returned again and nailed him in the opposite side. Instincts hardened by training and experience began to kick in as he sought to escape the blonde's sudden assault. It was all for naught, though, as he took another right to the stomach and a snap kick to the same abused side. Staggering back, the Hyuga prodigy preformed the strongest body flicker he could manage as he moved to put distance between them. And it worked, or so he thought, up to the point where the blonde dropped to his knees instead of following and instead began to flick through hand seals faster than anything he had shown up to that point. Doton, Doryoheki, Earth Release, Earth-style wall. With his enhanced vision, Niji saw the large wall suddenly sprout up from ground behind him. Mid-Shushin, he barely had time to stop himself from going splat and paid the price when the chakra he had expelled in the opposite direction slammed back into his own body. He winced and closed his eyes for a brief second as he tried to stop all his momentum. More than enough time for Naruto to continue his work. 3 hand signs and a body flicker of his own later, and the blonde had covered half the distance between them before he thrusted both his hands with open palms at his opponent. The Byakugan active Niji saw the build-up of chakra seconds before the jutsu took effect. Futon, Repashu, Wind Release, Gale Wind Palm. The jutsu covered the distance between them in a flash. Niji was uprooted from his feet and thrown back with tremendous force before he was slammed into the wall. His body seized up, and the genin coughed up a wad of blood as his midsection was abused. He slid down to his knees and fell onto his hands as his world twisted around him and a throb of pain began in the back of his head. Through sheer willpower alone, the Hyuga genin focused his vision enough to see what came next. The 3 shadow clones covered the remaining distance between them with more of the same surprising speed. The older genin forced his way to his feet as fast as he could and lashed out his left palm in an attempt to stop his attackers. It was a sloppy and useless gesture. The first clone that reached him slapped the hand down roughly as it flipped over him. Catching itself against the wall using chakra coating its hands, it launched a mule kick into his back that sent him sprawling back down and onto the ground. Half a second later, the clone had leaped down and falling onto his back as the 2 others slid to a stop on either side and grabbed each of his arms. Frustrated Niji could do nothing as the 3 clones each drew a kunai and placed the tips near his naked jugular. There was no more struggle. The older genin with wide eyes deactivated his bloodline limit before his head fell over in shame. He had been beaten. In the academy, Naruto shouted from the distance between them. The clone jutsu was my worst skill. 3 times I failed because I was unable to do it. But instead of letting it dictate how I should live, I choose to keep on working. A smirk and a shake of his head. Now is one of my best. Don't let anyone tell you what you can and do, or what you can or can't be. He turned his attention to the awe-struck examiner, standing off to the side. Well? The Chunin looked between the 2 of them and shook his head as he scoffed in disbelief. With a hand raised to the sky, he turned to the crowd around him and shouted the words the blonde had longed to hear. Winner, Uzamaki Naruto. The roar of pure emotion that followed was sweeter than any ramen could ever be. He won. Yamanaka Ino shouted in disbelief, her facial expressions matched. That idiot actually won. Haruno Sakura sat in equal disbelief as she looked down onto the arena floor below them. The abundance of noise around them, keeping her thoughts from properly forming. Jaw dropped, she watched as the clones dispelled and the proctor lowered the wall of earth that had erupted from the ground. Her eyes traced her own teammate's form as he walked over to the obnoxious orange cloak and reclaimed it as Medic loaded his older opponent onto a stretcher to take away. What in the hell did she just watch? On her left side, the strangely dressed genin with crutches had gone wild with glee as his brown-haired companion stared dumbly at the battlefield while muttering something under her breath. To her opposite side, the brown-haired male genin had taken to simply shake his head with a smile as the puppy in his lap continued to yip and bark. Still, her brain refused to work. He won? Her happy-go-lucky, helpless teammate won? Of course he did. That was what Naruto did. He overcame obstacles he had no business even trying to take down. He defeated enemies who he should have never even challenged. He won. A smile split her face as the fact seemed to take root. He had won. And for today, that was more than enough. Way to go, Naruto! That's it for today, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.